All right, well, let's get started this morning, and we'll get started with our first speaker. And our first speaker is Jason Kander. Now, last year was a great year for our first speaker. Secretary of State Jason Kander was sworn in as Missouri's 39th Secretary of State in January of 2013. He's America's youngest statewide elected official. A former U.S. Army captain, Jason is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Prior to his election as Secretary of State, he practiced law. Being a fellow attorney, don't hold it against him, please. He also represented Kansas City and Missouri's General Assembly and served on the Missouri Veterans Commission. He is a graduate of the American University and Georgetown Law School and is married to his high school sweetheart, Diana. Their son, True, was born September of 2013. Now, as Secretary of State, his office is comprised of 9 different divisions, but one of them is the Business Services Division, and it's where they maintain over 300,000 business entities in Missouri. That's where they're registered. And not only did Jason responsible for all of the registrations of those, but on his first day in office, Secretary Kander created the Business Outreach Office. Now that office is designed to guide small business owners through the next steps in creating their business. This office assists small business owners by helping them connect with other governmental entities at the state and local levels that people may not even realize that they need to connect with in order to make sure that they comply with all regulations and requirements. The Business Outreach Office also helps prospective business owners navigate that process of forming a business. So would you all please give a warm welcome to the Honorable Jason Kander. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for having me. I live here in Columbia now. We're from Kansas City, but I live here in Columbia now because I commute to the Capitol in Jeff City. And this morning I was practicing what I was going to say here. Steve mentioned that my wife Diana and I have a 6-month-old boy named True, and I was sort of going over my remarks for True. He was sort of my audience. He was in his jumper, jumping up and down. And so if y'all would jump up and down while I talk, it'd be very helpful to me. It's kind of what I'm used to at this point for this speech. But as I was doing that, I realized that I was doing the entire speech in baby talk. And so I cut it off right there because I didn't want to come up here and start out by saying, well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I didn't, and then tickle you. I didn't think you'd like that. So, but in all seriousness, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I think it's a fantastic event. It's a great thing to bring together smart people who have great ideas and start to talk about ways in which we can grow those ideas here in the state of Missouri. And for me, that's sort of a hobby of mine, making sure that we work on business ideas and on starting businesses here in the state. And that's sort of what I want to talk to you about today, is sort of the state of Missouri's approach and my approach to this idea of growing jobs, of economic development in the state, and sort of where you figure into that. As Steve mentioned, since I took office, I started the Business Outreach Office, which the simplest way to explain it to you is that even though you're a pretty young audience, I bet a lot of you have started a business at some point before. So raise your hand if you have filed paperwork with our office at some point. Yeah, that's a pretty good sampling considering your age. So you know what I'm talking about. We're sort of the front door to business in the state. And so what we have in common with a lot of organizations that are there to mentor people who want to have successful businesses is really just the relationship that we have with the people who are starting them. So what our office does is as simple as introducing folks who have started a new business to people who are there to help them around the state and kind of mentor them and bring them through the process. And so it's something that we've enjoyed doing so far and working with organizations around the state. And I take this idea of entrepreneurship pretty seriously. the Secretary of State's office has done a good job for a few years here of making it less expensive to start a business, making it more convenient to start a business. So we wanted to kind of take that next step and make it a little more likely that you'd be successful in that business. And I sort of married into entrepreneurship. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I kind of married into it. My wife, Diana, is here with me. We can probably get her to wave. So Diana is an entrepreneur. She has started and sold several companies, sometimes successful, sometimes not as successful, because that's what it's like to be an entrepreneur, but has had some success in it and is now a senior fellow at the Kauffman Foundation. So you might think that somebody in my job would come home at the end of the day and talk about politics, but what we do is I come home and we talk about business ideas that she read about, or we talk about startups and that sort of thing, because it interests both of us a lot, and it's really, it's her field, and she's a lot smarter about it than I am, and I've learned a lot by marrying into entrepreneurship and watching somebody with a very close view of my own start up businesses and go through what it's like to do that. So I want to tell you really today a dirty little secret about politicians and economic development, politicians and entrepreneurship. How many of you have noticed that there are frequently articles that you'll see about folks in state government working on trying to bring really large companies to our state, right? Or folks coming into our state and trying to recruit companies away, right? And so how many of you have wondered, for instance, why there seems to be so much talk about that and not as much talk about growing businesses here, making sure that folks who have a business idea already in Missouri can be effective in that, right? It's something that concerns me. So the dirty little secret is, I think the reason that happens is because when two of you get together and start a business in your garage, you generally don't put out a press release that a politician can put a quote in and get their name in the paper, right? And when you file a new LLC with our office and you start a business, you generally don't hold a ribbon cutting that a politician can show up to and get their picture on the front page of the paper. That's pretty much it. That's a big part of why the focus ends up being not on entrepreneurship, but it ends up being on what I call job poaching, trying to take existing companies from other states. And I happen to think that a lot more of the focus of your state government should be on you. It should be on really homegrown people who have good ideas and making sure that those ideas have an opportunity to come to fruition. So I can talk all day about trying to grow new businesses in the state, but it's really just a matter of cultivating the ideas and the energy that you have and sort of growing that energy into businesses in the state. Because the truth is that job poaching, trying to move one big company to another state, really just drains the resources of the state. It's really money that can be spent on other things. Sometimes it works, but a lot of the time it's just sort of a way to not grow jobs, but to move jobs from one state to another. It's not a way to really grow the economy. And that's really where you all come in. Because if you think about it, most of our biggest successes in the state, stuff like Express Scripts, Cerner, Veterans United, these are homegrown companies that started as startups. At some point, they were just a couple of people, right, trying to grow something. And so that's where our focus has to be. And on the other hand, or the other piece to this is that if a company leaves a state to come to your state because you give them some great big tax incentive, the fact is that when that tax incentive runs out, they're likely to go to another state for another deal. How many of you are baseball fans here? It's just free agency, right? Somebody gets to the end of their contract with a team, and then there's another great offer coming, and they might be wearing a different uniform next year. So any company that's likely to do that is likely to do it again. And it's the reason that I think we have to cultivate people like you, folks with ideas. And so that's really what our office is working on, because every major company in the state started as a startup. And so quickly, there are three ways that I think we do this. And so when you have the opportunity to talk with people in state government, when you have the opportunity to talk with your elected officials, I'd ask you to focus on these three things. These three things are, and this is what we're really focused on. The first is be predictable for business, be predictable. And then once you are predictable, try to be innovative in government, a little entrepreneurial. And then finally, invest in education, including entrepreneurship education. So every politician thinks that they have the magic bullet, right? They all think that they have the plan that's going to create lots of jobs in the state, and that's what they talk about. But when you talk to most business owners, they don't talk about the need for a decrease or an increase in regulation or a decrease or an increase in taxes. For the most part, what most business owners will talk to you about is the need to know what the rules are. Some level of predictability, so that every time a new person gets elected, you don't all of a sudden have taxes ebbing and flowing and a new project, a new pet idea. You pick a vision and you try to stick with it for a while so that new business owners and existing business owners know what the rules are, and they can operate under those rules and they can focus on their business. That's really what most business owners want. When you don't talk about politics or ideology and you just talk about businesses, that's really what they're about. And that's really a matter of becoming a little bit more predictable as far as state government goes. And once you become a little bit more predictable, you get to be a little bit innovative. And that's, I think, the next step. And many communities are trying to do this, but they're falling pretty far behind because government, I think, often has a belief that they can't be as flexible as all of you. They can't be as flexible as the private sector. But in reality, we really can. I'll give you an example. There are great innovation centers all over the state and all over the country, really. And a lot of times, you'll see a politician visit one of these innovation centers, and they'll see some successful businesses, and then they want to go home and they want to replicate it. But they try to have somebody who has no experience as an entrepreneur run it, or no entrepreneurs be involved with it at all. And as a result, you sort of have something that is not catered to entrepreneurs. What you end up with is a very nice building with a lot of empty offices. And we've got to be more innovative about bringing more entrepreneurs, more people with entrepreneurship experience into that process. But it's also simple stuff, like if you need to create a new website or you need to bid out any kind of project in your community, it's okay to bid it out to local entrepreneurs. It's okay to sort of crowdsource that idea and bring in creative people like yourselves and say, how do you think we ought to do this if we don't have the expertise in this? There are ways to be very flexible. So I truly believe in all of these things. I truly believe in innovation. I just think it's good if it's entrepreneur driven, and that's, I think, how we need to focus on it. So finally, one of the biggest things that I think we can do to help all of you and to help people with ideas in our state and try and sort of all practice this hobby that I mentioned of trying to keep talented people in the state and keep their ideas and their businesses in the state is to focus on education. And that's something that you'll hear a lot of people in office say, right? That you got to focus on education. But what it comes down to is a couple of things. The first is simply fully funding education, recognizing that to have a really competitive workforce, and not just a workforce, but a group of people in the state who have the ability to be creative and to come up with new ideas and turn those into businesses that can employ other people, you've got to have a first-class education system, one that can compete globally, not just regionally, not just with Iowa and Arkansas and Oklahoma, but with China and Japan and countries in Europe. So you have to fully fund it, but part of that has got to be entrepreneurship education. It's got to be a recognition that entrepreneur is an acceptable job to decide that you want to do when you grow up, right? We got to make sure that it's reasonable that guidance counselors in school would be able to say to you, well, I think maybe you'd be interested in being an entrepreneur, and maybe you should consider an entrepreneurship major when you go to college. We've got to make sure that that's a part of it, but the only way to do that is to fully fund education and make sure that K through 12 education has the resources that it needs. And we can talk about all the different policies that can go into it and how innovative you can be in education, but at the end of the day, while it's true that you can't just throw money at the problem, it is expensive, and you've got to spend the money that you have on it. You have to invest in education in order to make it work, because young leaders like you are only going to get to the point where you are through quality education systems and only going to excel even further through it. So those are the three things, frankly, that I think we have to focus on. It's be predictable, be innovative once you've been a little bit predictable, and then invest in education, because it's our very best economic development policy. So I really appreciate the fact that all of you are here. I think it's an outstanding event. I'm honored to get to be a part of it, to get to sort of help you kick it off. And thank you very much for having me, and go create something. So thanks very much.